Today, we're exploring one of the most persistent Cold War mysteries, the Montauk Project. Before we start, let me ask you something simple. Have you ever heard stories about a radar base where people claim the US military tested mind control or even time experiments? Some of you may know it from conspiracy forums, others from Stranger Things, which drew loose inspiration from these claims. In this episode, we'll look at what witnesses said, what documents exist, and what the base was really used for. By the end, you'll have a clear view of what's fact, what's rumor, and what still raises questions. The story begins with a single image, a grainy late-night photo of Camp Hero's massive radar tower rising over the trees. For years, people who worked near the base have said something unusual happened there, something far beyond regular radar tests. According to their accounts, strange orders were given, entire rooms were sealed off, and some experiments pushed past the limits of what science could safely do. A few former servicemen even claimed that something about the energy coming from the radar wasn't normal, and that certain protocols felt like they were designed for more than tracking aircraft. At the same time, official records show nothing more than a Cold War defense site. The documents describe radar upgrades, electronics procurement, and routine maintenance. Nothing about mind control research, nothing about psychological experiments, and definitely nothing about bending time. So here's the core question for this episode. Did these extraordinary claims grow from misunderstood Cold War research? Or did something happen at Camp Hero that still isn't fully explained today? In the next sections, we'll look at the base's real mission, the eyewitness stories that fueled decades of speculation, the declassified files that reveal what was actually funded, and the scientific limitations of high-power electromagnetic systems. By comparing every piece, testimony, documents, technical analysis, and cultural impact, we'll see which parts of the Montauk story make sense, which parts fall apart, and which parts remain open even now. To understand why the Montauk story became so powerful, we need to look at what Camp Hero actually was, and what the United States was dealing with during the Cold War. Camp Hero sits on the eastern tip of Long Island, a strategic position facing the Atlantic. In the late 1940s and 1950s, the US military needed radar stations capable of detecting incoming Soviet bombers long before they reached major cities. That's why the massive AN/FPS-35 radar tower was built. It was one of the strongest radar systems ever deployed on American soil, producing extremely high-power radio waves designed to track aircraft far offshore. Everything about the base was shaped by Cold War logic. Secrecy was normal. Personnel rotated often. Certain areas were restricted. The government didn't explain details of radar research to the public, not because something supernatural was happening, but because radar upgrades, electronic warfare techniques, and early computer networking systems were considered sensitive. Even routine research, like reducing interference, boosting range, or analyzing how radio waves behaved over water, was classified. This environment created the perfect conditions for rumors. Local residents heard the constant hum of the radar turning. They saw trucks delivering unusual electronic equipment. They noticed buildings sealed or locked for long periods. When the base eventually shut down, the empty bunkers, rusting doors, and leftover wiring made the place feel even more mysterious. Another important factor was timing. During the 1970s and 1980s, the public learned about real secret programs like MK Ultra, Operation Paperclip, and early CIA behavioral studies. Once these became known, people started to wonder what else had been hidden. Camp Hero, with its giant radar dish and restricted history, fit naturally into that mindset. There was also a gap between official documents and what locals remembered. The paperwork focuses on radar upgrades, environmental surveys, telecom maintenance, and equipment procurement. But many residents remembered more activity than the documents show, including late-night work, strange noise patterns, and frequent visits by contractors. None of this proves anything unusual, but it gave people a starting point for speculation. By the 1980s, Camp Hero was decommissioned, fenced off, and slowly being reclaimed by nature. The buildings remained locked, the underground rooms were inaccessible, and the radar tower, too large and expensive to dismantle, stayed in place like a relic from a different world. Visitors reported odd electrical readings around the site, which can happen near large metal structures, but it added to the sense that the place carried leftover energy. All of these pieces, Cold War fear, real secrecy, abandoned facilities, and unexplained memories, set the stage for what came next. The eyewitness claims that transformed Camp Hero from a forgotten radar base into the center of one of America's most persistent conspiracy stories. The Montauk story truly exploded in the 1980s and 1990s when a small group of men began sharing detailed accounts of what they claimed happened inside Camp Hero. The most influential figure was Preston Nichols, an electronics technician who said he recovered memories of working on classified psychological experiments at the base. According to him, these memories surfaced through a mix of personal reflection and conversations with others who believed they were part of the same events. His books, especially the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, became the foundation of the entire narrative. Nichols described a program where researchers supposedly used high-power electromagnetic fields to influence human thought, trigger altered states, or even open time windows. He claimed that certain individuals, including a young boy later known in the lore as the Montauk Kid, were placed in sensory isolation rooms and exposed to unique radio frequencies. In the story, these signals were said to amplify psychic ability or unlock hidden mental functions. None of these claims have supporting documents, but the level of detail in the testimonials made them compelling to people who already distrusted government secrecy. Another key voice was Stuart Swerdlow, who said he was a test subject at the base. He described memories of psychological conditioning, trauma-based protocols, and experiments intended to push human consciousness into extreme states. These accounts were controversial, partly because they relied heavily on recovered memories, a type of memory that psychologists often warn can be influenced by suggestion. Even so, Swerdlow's stories lined up with themes from Nichols' books, giving followers the sense that multiple witnesses were confirming the same events. A few other individuals stepped forward with smaller claims, sightings of unusual equipment, unfamiliar uniforms, or restricted areas that seemed unnecessary for a radar station. Some said they saw groups of children being brought in or out of the facility, though no photographic or written evidence supports this. Local rumors merged with the more dramatic testimonials, and the line between memory, interpretation, and storytelling became harder to separate. The media also played a role. Talk radio shows, early cable TV programs, and small investigative magazines were eager for sensational content. The Montauk claims fit perfectly into a time when the public had just learned about MK-Ultra, which proved that the US government had conducted real mind control studies in the past. The idea that another secret program might have existed, this time involving electromagnetic fields and psychological testing, didn't seem impossible to many listeners. By the mid-1990s, Camp Hero had transformed from a closed military base into a cultural node for conspiracy theories. Whether the stories were accurate, exaggerated, or shaped by the era's fascination with recovered memories, they created a powerful narrative that still influences how people see the site today. When people hear the Montauk claims, the next question is simple. What do the official documents show? The answer is mixed. There are real files describing Camp Hero's construction, radar upgrades, environmental issues, and equipment procurement. But other areas remain blank, either because records were never created, were discarded during decommissioning, or were never part of the base's mission in the first place. The clearest documents come from military engineering and environmental agencies. These include maps of the radar installation, wiring diagrams for the AN FPS-35 tower, and reports on soil contamination left by old fuel tanks and electronic components. These records confirm that the base operated exactly as expected for an air defense radar site. They show no references to psychological labs, human testing areas, or underground research programs. They mainly focus on power demands, antenna maintenance, and the effects of high-power radio waves on nearby equipment. Procurement logs also help paint a grounded picture. They list orders for vacuum tubes, radar modulators, heavy-duty cables, cooling systems, and replacement parts for the transmitter. Everything points to a facility dedicated to tracking aircraft and improving radar reliability. There is nothing about specialized medical instruments, monitoring rooms for human subjects, or data recording systems that would match the claims made in Montauk testimonials. Another clear set of documents comes from the environmental cleanup phase in the 1990s. When the base was transferred toward public use, agencies had to survey the area to identify hazards. Their reports mention asbestos, lead paint, abandoned fuel lines, and electrical hazards. They do not identify any hidden labs, sealed tunnels containing medical equipment, or toxic materials that would imply classified human experiments. Teams physically entered many structures and documented their condition, but nothing pointed to the type of setup described in the conspiracy accounts. However, there are gaps, and those gaps often fuel rumors. Some operational logs from the 1960s through 1980s are incomplete. Certain records were likely destroyed under standard document retention rules. And because Camp Hero operated alongside nearby Air Force facilities, some of its activities may have been recorded under different base names or unit codes. To people already suspicious, these normal bureaucratic issues look like intentional erasure, even though the same patterns appear at many decommissioned Cold War sites. One more factor adds confusion: underground structures. Some rooms under the base are sealed due to safety risks or structural instability. Official documents mention utility tunnels, cable conduits, and storm shelters, but they do not include detailed maps of every underground area. This lack of detail has amplified speculation that entire labs once existed below the radar tower. In short, the documents we do have point clearly to a radar-focused mission. The documents we lack leave just enough empty space for speculation to thrive. And it's the contrast between these two realities, clear technical records and unexplained gaps, that keeps the Montauk story alive. To understand which Montauk claims are technically possible, we need to look at how high-power radar systems actually work. The AN/FPS-35 at Camp Hero was designed to send out extremely strong radio waves that could bounce off aircraft and return useful tracking data. It produced megawatts of power at specific frequencies, but its effects were predictable and well documented. Engineers who worked with these systems described common issues: interference with nearby electronics, heating effects on metal surfaces, and occasional problems with birds flying through the beam. These effects can be intense, but they stay within physical limits. One claim in the Montauk story is that the radar's electromagnetic fields could influence human thought or create altered psychological states. Modern research shows that strong EM fields can cause heating, sensory interference, or discomfort. But there's no evidence they can control thoughts or unlock hidden mental abilities. Even experimental work in neuroscience relies on precise, low-power magnetic stimulation, not the huge, unfocused blasts produced by Cold War radars. The difference is massive. Radar energy spreads widely and loses intensity quickly, which makes targeted psychological effects impossible with known physics. Another dramatic claim involves time manipulation. From a scientific standpoint, this idea has no support. Nothing about high-power RF systems can bend time or create portals. Radar waves move at the speed of light, reflect off objects, and decay with distance. They don't alter physical space. Electrical engineers who study field behavior explain that the Montauk radar didn't generate exotic conditions. It created strong electromagnetic fields, but those fields behaved exactly as theory predicts. There's no known mechanism for radar energy to open time windows or shift objects across space. However, some aspects of the Montauk story do reflect real Cold War research themes. The US military did fund studies into how EM fields affect cognition, but these studies focused on fatigue, alertness, and communication reliability, not mind control. Similar research occurred worldwide because radar operators needed to stay alert during long shifts. These protocols were basic and documented, but decades later, they may have been misinterpreted as something more dramatic. Another realistic angle involves electronic warfare research. Engineers studied jamming, interference, and signal disruption. These experiments required unusual wiring setups, temporary equipment installations, and restricted rooms. To someone outside the program, that might look mysterious, but the purpose was technical, understanding how to defend against Soviet radar systems and improve US detection capabilities. The bottom line is clear. Radar systems like the one at Camp Hero were powerful and complex, but their capabilities were grounded in known physics. They could interfere with electronics, generate heat, and disrupt signals. But they could not control minds, enhance psychic abilities, or alter time. Understanding the science helps separate what could realistically happen at Camp Hero from what belongs to fiction or misinterpretation. If the Montauk Project didn't involve time portals or advanced mind control technology, then where did these ideas come from? One explanation is that several real programs and environmental factors may have been misunderstood, exaggerated, or blended together over time, creating a story that seemed more dramatic than the reality. First, Camp Hero's radar system was unusual for civilians living nearby. The AN/FPS-35 was one of the most powerful radars on the East Coast, and its operation produced noticeable effects. Locals sometimes heard a steady hum when the dish rotated. Radios picked up interference. TV signals glitched. Metal objects vibrated when the radar swept directly over them. For people unfamiliar with electromagnetic systems, these effects could feel strange or threatening, especially at night. Over time, those real experiences may have evolved into stories about hidden dangers or secret experiments. Second, certain Cold War research programs, unrelated to Camp Hero, became public in the 1970s, including MK Ultra. When people learned the government had actually tested drugs and psychological techniques on unwitting subjects, it damaged public trust. That loss of trust made it easier for news stories, even without evidence, to sound believable. If one secret program existed, why not another? Camp Hero, with its imposing radar tower and fenced-off buildings, fit perfectly into that mindset. Third, memory can be influenced by suggestion. Some Montauk testimonies came from people who believed they recovered memories through hypnosis or guided sessions. Psychologists caution that this process can create vivid but unreliable memories, especially when the person enters the session already expecting something unusual. Stories told by Preston Nichols and others may have shaped how these individuals interpreted their own feelings, dreams, or incomplete recollections of the past. Another realistic explanation involves classified communication work. During the Cold War, some radar stations also supported research on electronic warfare and communication disruption. These tasks required temporary setups, unique equipment, and special teams. If someone walked past a room filled with unfamiliar devices or saw technicians working at odd hours, it could be easy to assume something secretive or unusual was happening. In truth, much of this work involved testing how radar systems reacted to interference or how signal processing algorithms could be improved. Lastly, abandoned military sites naturally attract speculation. When Camp Hero closed, buildings deteriorated, doors were welded shut, underground rooms filled with water or debris. Anyone exploring the site decades later would find dark tunnels, broken wiring, rusted panels, and unexplained sealed areas. These conditions make it easy for visitors to imagine hidden labs or forgotten experiments, even when the real explanation is structural safety or contamination control. Taken together, these factors, powerful radar effects, real Cold War secrecy, damaged public trust, memory distortion, and the eerie nature of abandoned facilities, offer grounded explanations for how the Montauk legend may have grown. While they don't confirm the dramatic claims, they show how ordinary elements can be misinterpreted and transformed into a larger, more mysterious story over time. The Montauk story didn't grow in isolation. It became powerful because it connected to older conspiracy traditions, recent historical revelations, and the public's growing interest in hidden government programs. Understanding these connections helps explain why the Montauk narrative spread so widely. One major influence was the Philadelphia experiment, a story claiming the U.S. Navy teleported a ship in 1943. Although historians consider it a hoax, the idea remained popular for decades. When Montauk witnesses claimed time manipulation and electromagnetic experiments, many listeners immediately linked the two stories. Some conspiracy writers even suggested both programs were part of a larger secret network, though no evidence supports this. Still, the similarity in themes made the Montauk claims feel familiar and easier for people to accept. Another connection comes from MK Ultra. When the public learned the CIA had run actual mind control experiments, trust in military and intelligence institutions dropped sharply. The idea that official documents could hide important details suddenly felt realistic. So when Camp Heroes records showed gaps or missing logs, some people assumed the worst. The timing mattered. The Montauk stories emerged right when the world was reevaluating government transparency. Pop culture also shaped how the Montauk narrative evolved. Science fiction in the 1980s and 1990s often used plots about secret labs, psychic children, and military experiments gone wrong. These themes influenced how witnesses described their memories and how audiences interpreted them. Later, Stranger Things borrowed loose ideas from Montauk, pushing the story into mainstream entertainment. After that, thousands of new fans began searching for the real place behind the show, reinforcing the idea that something extraordinary must have happened there. Psychology plays a role too. Humans look for patterns, especially when faced with uncertainty. A fenced-off radar base with sealed rooms encourages people to fill in the blanks. If someone hears a rumor and then sees a locked door or strange piece of equipment, their mind naturally connects the two. Over time, small assumptions can evolve into complete narratives. This process is common in folklore, where stories adapt to cultural fears and interests. Another layer involves communities built around conspiracy discussions. When several people share similar ideas, online or at local meetings, their stories can merge into a unified storyline. Differences are smoothed out, and repeated details start to feel like evidence. Montauk became a hub for these discussions, especially in the early internet era, when forums spread unverified claims quickly. Taken together, these cultural, historical, and psychological factors explain why the Montauk Project became such a persistent idea. It connects older myths, real government secrecy, entertainment influences, and human pattern-seeking behavior. Even without solid evidence, these connections make the story feel larger and more believable to many people. Even if the dramatic Montauk claims aren't supported by evidence, the story still matters today. It highlights the long-term impact of secrecy, the consequences of poor communication, and the challenges of maintaining public trust during sensitive research. These issues remain relevant for governments, scientists, and citizens. One lesson is simple: secrecy creates space for speculation. During the Cold War, Military officials often kept even routine research classified. They did this for national security, not to hide unethical actions, but the result was the same. The public had no context. When people later discovered that programs like MK Ultra had been hidden, they began to question everything else. Camp Hero became another symbol of a government that wasn't fully open about what it was doing. Another lesson involves abandoned infrastructure. When a site with a secretive past is left to decay, it naturally becomes a magnet for rumors. Camp Hero is a perfect example. The rusted doors, fenced-off bunkers, and sealed underground rooms look suspicious, even when the real reasons are environmental safety or structural damage. Without clear explanations, the public fills the gaps with imagination or fear. Modern defense research faces similar challenges. Projects involving AI, surveillance systems, advanced communications, and electromagnetic testing need public confidence. If people feel excluded or misinformed, distrust grows. The Montauk story shows how quickly rumors can expand when official explanations are limited or delayed. Ethics also play a major role. Today, research involving humans or sensitive technologies must follow strict guidelines. Transparency, oversight, and consent are essential. The Montauk narrative reminds us how important these protections are. Even if the events described in the story never happened, the idea that they could happen reflects real concerns about ethical boundaries in military science. People want to know that new technologies won't harm them or be used without accountability. There's also a cultural dimension. Montauk demonstrates how myths can form around real problems: secrecy, confusing technology, and a lack of trust. These myths spread quickly because they express fears people already have. Modern institutions can learn from this. Better communication reduces misinformation. Clear explanations prevent small misunderstandings from becoming large stories. Finally, the Montauk debate encourages us to think about how we verify claims. It pushes us to compare memories with documents and rumors with scientific limitations. It reminds us that unusual stories often grow from ordinary situations where information is incomplete. In the end, Montauk matters because it reveals a deeper issue. When people don't feel informed, they look for answers elsewhere. And once a story becomes part of culture, even strong evidence can struggle to replace it. This is why transparency and public engagement are critical for every field that deals with sensitive or emerging technology. Let's bring everything together. We started with the dramatic claims, mind control, psychic training, and even time manipulation, said to have taken place at Camp Hero. These stories came mainly from a handful of testimonials in the 1980s and 1990s, especially from Preston Nichols and Stuart Swerdlow. Their accounts were detailed, but they relied heavily on recovered memories and lacked supporting records. When we looked at the actual documents, a different picture emerged. The files show a radar base focused on air defense, equipment maintenance, and environmental management. Procurement logs list radar components, not medical tools. Cleanup reports describe asbestos and fuel tanks, not hidden labs. The technical evidence shows the AN/FPS-35 radar was powerful, but its electromagnetic effects were well understood and couldn't produce the extraordinary results described in the Montauk claims. Then we explored how cultural and psychological factors helped the story grow. The timing of Cold War secrecy, the discovery of MK Ultra, the influence of older conspiracy traditions like the Philadelphia experiment, and the rise of early internet communities all played a role. Pop culture, especially Stranger Things, kept the myth alive and introduced it to new generations. So what can we conclude? There is no solid evidence supporting the extreme Montauk claims, but there are clear reasons why the story became believable to many people. The real lessons involve secrecy, public trust, and how easily confusion can turn into myth when information is incomplete. Montauk shows that even ordinary military research can create powerful stories when the public doesn't have a clear picture of what's happening. These themes matter today just as much as they mattered during the Cold War. Thanks for staying with me until the end. The Montauk Project remains one of the most debated Cold War stories, even without solid evidence. Now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this mystery do you think deserves a deeper look? The eyewitness claims, the missing documents, or the cultural impact that keeps the story alive? Drop your thoughts in the comments so we can explore them together. If you found this breakdown helpful, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who enjoys untangling complex historical mysteries. And if you want more Cold War or secret program episodes, check out the links I've added below.